The Cathedral of St. Alban stood defiant against the winter sky, its spires piercing the low clouds like the lances of forgotten knights. Inside, the air was thick with incense and the murmur of silk-clad spectators, dukes, earls, and their powdered wives, who had come not for joy, but for the spectacle of a young woman's surrender. Snow drifted past the stained-glass windows, casting pale blue light across the marble floor, where Cordelia Fairmont stood at the altar in her borrowed gown of dove-gray wool. The sapphire corset hugged her slender waist, a cruel mockery of elegance, while her ash-blonde hair trembled with every shallow breath. She clutched a bouquet of crimson roses, their petals already wilting from the cold. She counted the steps to the side door, 14, imagining a sudden dash through the snow, vanishing into the city's labyrinth. But the pews were full, every eye fixed upon her, some with pity, most with the satisfaction of those who had never been forced to choose between ruin and ruinous marriage. Across from her stood Duke Leopold Hawthorne, tall and unyielding in his black frock coat, the tall top hat resting in his gloved hands. His raven hair was swept back, his thick beard framing a face carved from granite. His amber eyes remained forward, as if the ceremony were a duty to be endured rather than a union to be celebrated. Cordelia had expected cruelty. The Empire whispered the Duke's coldness, his unyielding will. Yet when their gazes briefly met, she saw no malice, only a stillness, like a lake frozen over a hidden current. The bishop's voice droned through the vows, each word falling like a stone into still water. Cordelia's father was not present. He had remained at home, unable to watch his daughter pay the price for his debts. Lord Halvard, the smooth-tongued intermediary, had offered salvation, clear the Fairmont estate's staggering obligations in exchange for Cordelia's hand in marriage to the Duke. Her father had wept, but he had signed the papers. No one had asked Cordelia what she wished. Do you, Cordelia Fairmont, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? The question hung in the air. The assembly leaned forward, hungry. I do, she whispered, the words splintering like ice. The bishop turned to Leopold. And do you, Leopold Hawthorne, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Everyone expected the familiar reply. Instead, Leopold's voice rang clear and deliberate. I will. A ripple passed through the congregation, soft as distant thunder. Cordelia felt her stomach twist. He still had not looked at her, not once since she had walked down the long aisle. By the authority vested in me, the bishop declared them man and wife. The words landed heavily, final as a door closing. Leopold offered his arm. Cordelia hesitated, then laid her trembling hand upon his sleeve. His grip was careful, almost tentative, as though she were made of glass. They walked to the tunnel of staring eyes, out into the biting cold. Snow swirled around them as they approached the waiting carriage, its black lacquer gleaming under the gray sky. A footman opened the door. Leopold helped her inside with the same measured gentleness, his hand brushing her elbow only long enough to steady her. She flinched at the contact. He noticed, stepped back at once, and settled on the opposite bench. The carriage lurched forward, wheels crunching over fresh snow. Silence stretched between them, thick and cold. Cordelia kept her gaze on the window, watching the manor houses blur past. Her heart pounded so fiercely she thought he must hear it. She waited for him to speak, to demand, to claim what the law now allowed. But he said nothing. After a time, Leopold spoke, his voice low and even. You are safe, Lady Hawthorne. The title struck her like a blow. She turned to him, searching his face for mockery. She found none. He met her eyes at last. Whatever else this day has brought, know that I will not harm you. She swallowed, throat tight. Then why did you agree to this? He looked away, out into the falling snow. That is a question for another hour. The carriage rolled on toward Hawthorne Hall, vast and shadowed against the winter horizon. Cordelia's fingers tightened around the wilted roses. Yet in the quiet of that moment, as his hand had steadied her arm with unexpected care, a small confusion stirred within her dread. Would the stoic Duke claim his rights tonight, or was there a deeper secret hidden behind his silence? The carriage rattled to a halt before the great iron gates of Hawthorne Hall, and Cordelia's breath caught at the sight. Snow blanketed the vast estate in pristine white, softening the sharp lines of Stone Manor that rose against the darkening sky. Towers and gables pierced the low clouds, windows glowing faintly with lamplight like watchful eyes. Chimneys breathed thin smoke into frigid air, promising warmth she did not trust. Leopold stepped down first, offering his hand. She took it, her fingers cold even through her gloves, and descended into the snow. He did not release her immediately. Instead, he guided her toward the broad stone steps with the same careful restraint he had shown in the carriage. The wind tugged at her gray skirts and whipped stray ash-blonde strands from her chignon. She kept her gaze lowered, unwilling to meet the eyes of the servants who lined the entrance. Footmen in black livery, maids in starched caps, all silent, all watching. Inside, the grand hall swallowed them. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, their candles flickering in the draught. The air smelled of polished wood, beeswax, and something faintly of cedar smoke. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors stared down from gilded frames, their expressions as unyielding as the Duke's own. Leopold removed his top hat and handed it to a waiting footman. "This is your home now, Lady Hawthorne," he said quietly. "I will show you to your chambers." They ascended a sweeping staircase of dark oak, his boots echoing softly beside her lighter steps. He led her down a long corridor lined with doors and paused before one carved with delicate ivy. "This will be yours," he said, turning the handle and stepping aside. The room was larger than any she had ever known. A four-poster bed dominated the space, its hangings of deep sapphire silk matching the corset she still wore. A fire crackled in the marble hearth, casting golden light across a writing desk, a chaise longue, and a washstand with porcelain basin. Tall windows overlooked the snow-covered gardens, and on the inside of the door gleamed a sturdy brass lock. Leopold gestured toward it. "Use it if you wish." "I will not enter without your permission." He met her gaze for the first time since the cathedral. "You are safe here. I give you my word." Cordelia swallowed, her throat dry. "Thank you, your grace." He inclined his head, then withdrew, closing the door behind him with a soft click. She turned the key at once. The lock engaged with a satisfying thud. Then she leaned against the door, heart hammering, and sank to the floor. The roses she had carried from the ceremony lay discarded on the rug, their petals bruised and scattered. She pressed her palms to her face, willing the tears not to fall. Downstairs, the house settled into quiet. She heard the distant murmur of servants, the clink of silver, the soft tread of footsteps. Eventually, a gentle knock sounded at her door. She froze. No voice followed, only the faint scrape of a tray being set on the floor outside. Then silence. She waited a long time before she opened the door a crack, chain still in place. A silver tray rested on the carpet. A bowl of steaming soup, fresh bread, a glass of mulled wine, a small dish of preserved plums. No note, no explanation. She carried the tray inside and bolted the door again. The food was warm, fragrant, perfectly prepared. She ate alone at the small table by the fire, each bite tasting of salt and relief she did not want to feel. When she finished, she set the tray outside the door and locked it once more. Later, when the house had gone still, she stood at the window and watched snowfall in endless silence. The Duke's words echoed in her mind. "You are safe here." His word. The word of a man whose reputation was built on iron will and ruthless command. Yet he had not touched her. He had not demanded entry. He had given her a lock and the key to use it. She glanced at the door, at the brass lock that now stood between her and the rest of the world. Then she thought of his amber eyes, deep set and shadowed, holding something she could not name. But warm trays appeared outside her door without a word. Why would a feared Duke show such restraint, and what pain lurked in his amber eyes? The days following the wedding passed in a hush that felt almost deliberate. Hawthorne Hall was vast, its corridors long and shadowed, and Cordelia moved through them like a ghost in her own life. She kept her chamber most of the time. The brass lock turned firmly, the sapphire corset loosened only when she bathed. Meals arrived on silver trays outside her door at regular intervals. Breakfast, luncheon, supper, always warm, always perfect, always silent. No note, no demand, only the faint scrape of the tray being set down and retreating footsteps. On the fourth morning, she ventured farther. The house was quiet save for the distant clatter of servants at work. She followed the scent of fresh bread to the small breakfast room off the main hall. The door stood ajar, and she paused just outside, hidden by the heavy velvet drape. Two maids were setting the table, their voices low but clear. Heard it from the coachman himself. One whispered. Lord Halvard practically dragged the poor girl to the altar. The Fairmont estate was about to be seized. Debts piled higher than the roof. The Duke agreed to settle it all, but only if she married him. The other maid clicked her tongue. And she only 19. Imagine, the Empire's most eligible duke, and he takes a bride who was bought like a prize mare. Sure, the first hissed. He's in the library, if he hears. Cordelia stepped back, her hand pressed to her mouth. The words echoed in her skull, bought like a prize mare. She turned and fled back to her room, heart racing. That evening, she found Leopold in the library. He stood by the fire, a book open in his hands, though his gaze was fixed on the flames. The room was warm, lined with leather-bound volumes, and lit by tall brass lamps. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his features. "Lady Hawthorne," he said, setting the book aside. "I did not expect you." Cordelia remained in the doorway, fingers twisting in the folds of her gray dress. "I heard the servants talking." He stilled. "What do they say?" "That I was forced into this marriage. That my father's debts were the price of my hand. That Lord Halvard arranged it all." Her voice trembled but did not break. "Is it true?" Leopold exhaled slowly, as though the question had been waiting for him. He crossed the room and stopped several paces away, giving her space. "I was told the match was mutual," he said quietly. "That your family sought an alliance, that you were willing. Halvard presented it as a practical arrangement between old houses. I did not know you were coerced." Cordelia searched his face. The firelight caught the deep amber of his eyes, revealing shadows she had not noticed before, grief, perhaps, or regret. "You believe I wanted this?" she asked. "I believed you had a choice." His jaw tightened. "I was wrong." The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken things. Cordelia felt the truth settle over her like a cold mantle. He had not known. He had not intended to bind a woman against her will. "I am sorry," he said, the words low and deliberate, "for the part one played in your pain. I cannot undo the vows, but I can give you my word that you will never be forced to remain here against your will." She looked at him, really looked. The stoic mask had cracked, just enough for her to glimpse the man beneath. Weary, solitary, burdened by a reputation he had not entirely earned. "You will let me go?" she asked. "If that is what you truly wish." His voice was steady, but his hands were clasped behind his back, knuckles white. Cordelia felt something shift inside her, a small fracture in the wall of fear she had built. He had apologized. He had offered freedom, even if the law still chained them. But his quiet apology cracked his facade. But could she trust a man who still bound her by law? Or was freedom an illusion? Weeks slipped by like snow melting into the earth, slow, silent, almost imperceptible. Cordelia learned the rhythms of Hawthorne Hall. The creak of the great house settling at night, the soft chime of the grandfather clock in the hall, the way Leopold's boots echoed along the corridors before dawn. They moved around each other with the caution of two people who had both been burned by fire, never touching, never lingering in the same room longer than necessary. She ventured out more often now. She took her meals in the breakfast room, when she knew he would be in the library or the stables. She wandered the upper galleries, tracing the stern faces of Hawthorne ancestors with her fingertips. Leopold, for his part, kept his distance with deliberate care. Scandalous invitations arrived daily, gilded cards requesting their presence at winter balls and teas. Each one meant to parade the bought bride before the Empire's curious eyes. He returned them unopened, the envelopes tossed into the fire without a word. One evening, a particularly bold card arrived from Lady Cressida Montfort, whose salons were infamous for their venomous gossip. Cordelia found it on the silver tray outside her door, along with a note from Leopold in his precise hand. I have declined. You need not face them until you choose. She read the words twice, then burned the invitation herself. That night, sleep eluded her. The fire had died to embers, and the room felt too large, too empty. She rose, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and crossed the door. Her hand hovered over the brass lock. For long minutes she stood there, heart thudding against her ribs. Then, with trembling fingers, she turned the key and eased the door open just a crack. Enough for a sliver of lamplight to spill into the corridor. Enough to say, without words, that she was no longer barricaded against the house. She returned to bed and lay awake, listening to the silence. The next morning she descended to the breakfast room earlier than usual. Leopold was already there, standing by the window with a cup of coffee in his hand. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, surprise flickering across his face. "Good morning," he said quietly. She hesitated in the doorway, then stepped inside. "Good morning." He pulled out a chair for her, careful not to come too close, and poured her tea without asking. They sat in silence at first, the only sounds the clink of porcelain and the soft crackle of the fire. Cordelia watched him over the rim of her cup. The beard framed his jaw, the amber eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. He looked older than his years, as though carrying the weight of this state and its secrets alone had aged him. After a time, she spoke. "Thank you for burning the invitations." He set his cup down. "You should not have to endure their scrutiny." "And you," she asked, "does it not trouble you, the whispers?" A faint, wry smile touched his lips, the first she had seen. "I have heard worse. Let them talk." The silence returned, softer now, less strained. Cordelia felt the air between them shift, as though a door had been left ajar in her heart as well. Leopold cleared his throat. "There is a gentle mare in the stables, Clementine. She is steady, well-mannered. If you like to learn to ride, I would teach you." Cordelia's breath caught. Riding had always been a distant dream, something other girls did, girls who were not forced into marriage to save their families. She looked at him, searching for any sign of obligation or expectation. She found only quiet offer. I would like that," she said. He nodded once, as though the matter were settled. "Tomorrow, then, after breakfast." She managed a small smile. "Tomorrow." As he rose to leave, their eyes met for a moment longer than necessary. Something fragile passed between them. Trust, perhaps, or the first thread of it. A tentative shared breakfast brings fragile words, but when he offers to teach her to ride, will vulnerability shatter or heal? As fear whispered she might never escape the Empire's judgment without his protection, Cordelia realized some stories only continue if brave souls subscribe to hope without hesitation. Dare not miss what comes next, or lament in the comments why you'd abandon her now. The morning after their shared breakfast dawned crisp and clear, the snow sparkling under a pale winter sun. Cordelia met Leopold at the stables as promised, her breath clouding in the chill air. She had dressed in a simple riding habit of deep green wool, the sapphire corset replaced by a practical jacket that allowed easier movement. Her ash-blonde hair was pinned beneath a velvet hat, and her green eyes held a mixture of anticipation and nerves. Leopold waited beside a beautiful chestnut mare, her coat gleaming like polished mahogany. The horse nickered softly as they approached. "This is Clementine," he said, resting a gloved hand on the mare's neck. "She is patient and sure-footed. She will forgive any mistake." He demonstrated how to approach, how to speak softly, how to offer a sugar lump on an open palm. Cordelia mimicked him, her fingers trembling at first, but Clementine accepted the treat with gentle lips. Leopold then helped her into the side saddle, his hand steady and brief, one at her elbow, another briefly at her waist to steady her as she settled. The touch was necessary, impersonal, yet it sent a small jolt through her. They walked the mare in the snow-covered paddock at first, Leopold leading her by the bridle, while Cordelia learned to balance, to hold the reins lightly but firmly. He spoke in quiet, encouraging tones, correcting her posture without ever raising his voice. When she laughed at her first awkward trot, the sound surprised them both. Leopold's mouth curved in the faintest smile. "You have a natural seat," he said. "You'll be riding across the estate in no time." After several days of lessons, he deemed her ready for a short excursion beyond the grounds. "The village is only a few miles," he told her. "We will go together." The journey to the nearby market town was quiet, the snow muffling the horses' hooves. Cordelia rode beside him, her confidence growing with each mile. But as they entered the high street, heads turned. Whispers followed them like shadows. "There she is, the Fairmont girl. Bought and paid for, they say. Poor thing. Look at her, barely out of the schoolroom." Cordelia felt her cheeks burn. She kept her gaze forward, but her hands tightened on the reins. Leopold's expression remained calm, yet his posture changed, shoulders squared, eyes scanning the crowd with quiet authority. When a cluster of ladies near the milliner's shop tittered loudly enough to be overheard, "Imagine marrying a man twice her age for a title." Leopold reined his horse and turned to face them directly. The street fell silent. "Ladies," he said, his voice carrying without effort, "if you have something to say about my wife, you will say it to me. Otherwise, keep your opinions behind your fans where they belong." The women flushed and scattered, murmuring apologies. Leopold gave a curt nod and turned back to Cordelia. "They will not trouble you again," he said simply. She looked at him, heart pounding not from fear now, but from something warmer, something unfamiliar. His defense had been swift, unhesitating, and entirely for her. A quiet warmth bloomed in her chest, steady and bright. They rode home in companionable silence, the sun sinking low and painting the snow in rose and gold. That evening, as they sat by the fire in the library, Cordelia noticed a small portrait half hidden behind a stack of books on the mantel. She rose to examine it, a young woman with kind eyes and a baby in her arms. Leopold followed her gaze. His face changed, softening in a way she had never seen. "My first wife," he said quietly, "Mary, and our son, Jacob. Fever took them both 5 years ago." Cordelia's throat tightened. She reached out, almost touching his sleeve, then withdrew. "I am so sorry." He nodded, eyes distant. "I thought I would never feel anything again. But perhaps I was wrong." His defense ignited warmth in her chest. But discovering his tragic past loss would reveal his heart could ever truly open again. The library at Hawthorne Hall had become a sanctuary of sorts. After the riding lessons and the quiet defense in the village, Cordelia found herself drawn to its warmth more often. The room smelled of aged leather with smoke and the faint trace of Leopold's cologne, sandalwood and cedar. That evening, as the first winter storm rattled the windows, she entered with a book she had no intention of reading. Leopold was already there, seated in the high-backed chair nearest the fire. He did not look up at first, his gaze lost in the flames. The portrait she had glimpsed days before, a delicate woman with kind eyes and a child in her arms, still rested on the mantel, now uncovered, its frame polished as though someone had tended it recently. Cordelia hesitated, then crossed the room and settled on the opposite chair. The fire snapped and hissed, filling the silence between them. After a time, she spoke softly. "You love them very much." Leopold's eyes lifted to the portrait. His face, usually so composed, softened in a way that made him seem suddenly vulnerable. More than anything, he said. Mary was light. She laughed easily, loved fiercely. Jacob was only 3 when the fever came. He had her smile. He paused, his throat working. I was away in London when it happened. By the time I returned, they were gone. I arrived to an empty house, and 2 graves on the hill behind the chapel. Cordelia's chest tightened. She had known loss. Her mother's death when she was 12, her father's slow decline into despair, but nothing like this. She leaned forward, voice gentle. I cannot imagine. Leopold met her gaze, amber eyes glistening in the firelight. You do not have to, but you should know why I've been distant. I thought if I kept everyone at arm's length, the pain could not reach me again. Yet it did, anyway. A tear escaped, tracing a slow path down his bearded cheek. He did not wipe it away. Instead, he looked at her with raw honesty. I never expected to feel anything again. Then you came, afraid, angry, trapped. I found myself wanting to protect you, not because you were mine by law, but because you deserve better than fear. Cordelia felt her own eyes fill. She rose and crossed the mantel, touching the frame lightly. They were beautiful. She would have liked you, Leopold said quietly. She always said the world needed more gentle hearts. Cordelia turned to him, tears slipping down her freckled cheeks. I am not gentle. I am frightened. You are both, he replied, and that is no shame. She sank to the rug before the fire, close enough to feel its heat, but not so close as to touch him. They sat in silence as the storm howled outside, tears falling freely now. Hers for the weight of his grief, his for the years of solitude. When the fire had burned low, Leopold reached out, hesitating only a moment before resting his hand over hers on the hearth rug. Neither spoke. They did not need to. Their shared tears bridged the gulf. But as empire balls loomed, could she face the ton's cruelty without breaking? The invitation to Lady Cressida Montford's grand winter ball arrived despite Leopold's earlier refusals, delivered by a liveried messenger who bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the marble floor. Leopold had stared at the gilded card for a long moment before setting it aside. We need not go, he said quietly. The ton will find another amusement. But Cordelia, remembering the whispers in the village and the way Leopold had shielded her, felt a stubborn spark. If we hide forever, they win, she replied. I want to face them. Once. He studied her, amber eyes searching. Then we go together. The Montford townhouse blazed with light, its ballroom a sea of silk and jewels beneath crystal chandeliers that dripped like frozen rain. Cordelia wore a gown of midnight blue velvet, the sapphire corset replaced by delicate silver embroidery that caught the candlelight. Her ash-blonde hair was swept up in soft waves, a single pearl at her throat. Leopold stood beside her in severe black, his presence a quiet wall against the crowd. They had barely crossed the threshold when the whispers began. Heads turned. Fans snapped open like shields. Lady Cressida herself approached with a smile sharp as glass. Your Graces, she purred. How delightful to see the new Duchess out in society at last. We feared you might remain sequestered. Cordelia felt Leopold tense beside her. She lifted her chin. I am here now, Lady Cressida. Thank you for your hospitality. The lady's smile did not falter. Of course, though I must say, the Empire is still abuzz with the story of your swift alliance. Such a generous gesture from the Duke to rescue the Fairmonts from ruin. A cluster of women nearby tittered behind their fans. Indeed, one murmured loudly enough to carry. One wonders what the price truly was. A title for a bride, or a bride for a title. Another laughed. Poor child, bought like a filly at Tattersall's. Cordelia felt heat rise in her cheeks, but this time it was not shame. It was anger, clean, bright, and long overdue. She stepped forward, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. My father's debts were no secret, she said clearly. And yes, the Duke settled them. But I am no chattel to be bartered. I am his wife by law, and I stand here by choice. If you wish to judge, judge my father's misfortune, not my survival. Or better yet, judge your own husband's, who would have let us starve and called it prudence. Silence fell, sharp as a blade. Lady Cressida's smile froze. The women nearest her flushed, eyes wide. Cordelia did not wait for a response. She turned on her heel and walked out, past the staring crowd, through the double doors, into the snow-swept garden beyond. The cold bit at her skin, but she welcomed it. Behind her, Leopold followed without a word. She stopped beneath a bare trellis, breath clouding in the night air. Leopold reached her side, his voice low and dangerous. "They will not speak to you that way again." Cordelia shook her head, tears freezing on her lashes. "You cannot silence the entire ton." "I can make them regret it," he said, the promise quiet but ironclad. She looked up at him, seeing the fury in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. Something inside her cracked open, raw and aching. She had faced them. She had spoken, and yet the venom lingered, poised in the air she breathed. Back at Hawthorne Hall, the house was dark and silent. Cordelia climbed the stairs alone, her blue gown trailing like a shadow. In her chamber, she stood before the window and watched the snow fall in relentless silence. On the mantel lay the wilted red roses from her wedding day, preserved by some impulse she could not name. Now they were brittle, petals edged in frost. She opened the wardrobe, pulled out her traveling case, and began to pack. Not because she wished to leave him, but because she feared the Empire's cruelty would never cease, that her presence would only bring scandal and ruin upon the man who had shown her nothing but kindness. Alone on the porch again, roses frozen in her hand, she packed to flee, would leaving save him from ruin or destroy them both. The house lay dark and silent, save for the low moan of wind against the windows. Cordelia's chamber was lit only by a single lamp on the writing desk, its flame trembling as she sealed the letter with wax. The words inside were few, written in a hand that still shook. Gratitude for his kindness, regret for the shadows she cast, and a quiet promise that her leaving would spare him further scandal. She placed the folded paper beside the traveling case, half-packed of the few belongings she had brought to this marriage. Her gray dresses, the wilted roses now carefully wrapped in silk, the small locket that had once belonged to her mother. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the open case. Leaving would be simple. Slip down the servant's stair, summon a hired carriage at the village inn, disappear into London's anonymity before dawn. The Empire would whisper that the Duke's bride had fled. The gossip would fade in time. Leopold could salvage his reputation, marry again if he chose, live without the burden of a woman who had never truly belonged to him. Yet the thought of never seeing him again, of never hearing his quiet voice in the library, never feeling the brief warmth of his hand steadying her in the saddle, cut deeper than any cruelty the ton had offered. She rose, intending to finish packing, when a soft knock sounded at the door. Her heart lurched. She froze. The knock came again, gentle but insistent. "Cordelia?" Leopold's voice, low and urgent. "May I enter?" She hesitated, then crossed the room and opened the door just enough to see him standing in the corridor, still dressed in the black evening clothes from ball, his greatcoat dusted with fresh snow. In his hand, he held her letter unopened. "I found this on the hall table," he said. "I did not read it, but I know what it contains." Cordelia stepped back, allowing him inside. He closed the door softly behind him. "You cannot leave," he said quietly. "Not like this." She lifted her chin, though her eyes brimmed. "I will only bring ruin upon you. The ton will never let this rest. They will say you purchased a wife who could not bear the shame." Leopold set the letter on the desk without looking at it. He took a slow breath, as though gathering courage for words long held back. "I did not marry you for your family's debts, or for your title, or for any alliance." His voice was steady, but the shadows beneath his eyes betrayed sleepless nights. "I married you because when I saw you at the altar, afraid, alone, yet standing tall, I recognized something in you. The same loneliness that has haunted me since Mary and Jacob were taken. I thought, perhaps two broken souls might find a way to mend each other, not out of duty, but out of hope. Cordelia stared at him. The words landed softly, yet they struck her like a blow. "You never said," she whispered. "I was afraid you would think me no better than the men who bought you," he replied. "I wanted you to choose freely. If you wish to go, I will not stop you. I will even help you leave quietly. But know this, if you stay, it will be because you choose to, not because the law demands it." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She looked at the open case, at the letter, at the man who stood before her. Tall, bearded, weary, yet offered the only thing she had ever truly wanted: choice. She crossed the case, closed it, and carried it back to the wardrobe. One by one she unpacked her things, placing them carefully in their drawers. When the last dress was hung, she turned to him. "I choose to stay," she said softly. "I choose us." Relief softened the hard lines of his chiseled features, easing the tension from his shoulders. He stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Then let me do something for us," he said. "At the Empire's Grand Assembly next month, I will give you a gift, one that will shock them all." Cordelia searched his eyes. "What gift?" He shook his head. "You will see, but it will either free you forever or expose us to greater scandal than any ball could conjure." Relief softened his chiseled features. But his promised gift at the Empire's Grand Assembly would either free her forever or expose him to greater scandal. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Imperial Court shimmered beneath 1,000 candles, its marble columns draped in velvet and gold. Nobles filled the tiered galleries in silks and jewels, their whispers rising like smoke. The Emperor himself presided from the dais, though everyone knew this audience belonged to Duke Leopold Hawthorne, and the wife he had wed under such whispered circumstances. Cordelia stood beside him on a raised platform, her gown of pale green silk embroidered with silver threads that caught the light like new leaves. Her ash-blonde hair was crowned with a simple circle of pearls, and her green eyes held steady despite the sea of curious faces. Leopold, in severe black velvet, looked every inch the commanding duke, yet his hand rested lightly at the small of her back, a silent anchor. The herald announced them. The hall fell silent. Leopold stepped forward, his voice carrying clear and firm. "My lords and ladies, I stand before you today not to defend my marriage, but to correct a falsehood that has poisoned the Empire's air for too long." He withdrew a sealed deed from his coat, the parchment heavy with wax and royal seals. "This document transfers to my wife, Cordelia Hawthorne, full and independent ownership of the Hawthorne estates in the Western Marches, 200,000 acres of fertile land, with water rights, mineral rights, and sovereign title. The properties are hers alone, free of any encumbrance, to manage, sell, or hold as she chooses." A gasp rippled through the assembly. The Emperor leaned forward, brow raised. Leopold turned to Cordelia, his amber eyes softening. "I do not give this to bind you further, but to set you free. You are no longer my property by law or by rumor. You are my partner, my equal, and my choice. If you wish to walk away, the Empire will witness that you do so with every advantage in your power." He placed the deed in her hands. Cordelia's fingers closed around it, feeling the weight of years of fear lift like mist in sunlight. She looked out over the stunned faces, the same ones who had sneered at her as a bought bride, and raised her voice for all to hear. "I accept this gift," she said clearly, "not because I seek to leave, but because it proves what I have come to know, that love can grow even from the coldest ground. I choose to stay. I choose Leopold Hawthorne, not as a husband forced upon me, but as the man who saw my worth when no one else did. I love him." The words hung in the air. Then, slowly, a few hands began to clap. The sound grew, spreading until it filled the hall. Not the polite applause of courtly duty, but something warmer, something real. Leopold's hand found hers. He bowed to the Emperor, who nodded once with a faint, approving smile. They descended the steps together, the deed still in Cordelia's grasp, and walked out into the spring air that had finally thawed the long winter. At Hawthorne Hall, the snow had melted into rivers of green. Tulips pushed through the earth in bold reds and golds. Cordelia and Leopold rode side by side across the estate. Clementine steady beneath her, his great bay stallion matching pace. The wind carried the scent of blooming orchards, and the manor rose ahead. Home now, truly theirs. They dismounted in the garden where red roses had been planted anew, their petals unfurling in the sun. Leopold drew her close, his beard brushing her cheek as he kissed her forehead. "We begin again," he murmured. "And this time," she whispered back, "we choose every step." As the empire gasped and hearts mended, Cordelia feared that without faithful listeners subscribing instantly, such redemptive tales might fade forever. Don't hesitate, or step into the comments to confess why you let this love story end unfinished. And in the manor's blooming gardens, with red roses anew, they built a legacy of chosen love, proof that even forced beginnings can blossom into eternal joy.